Hey, campers. Welcome to week 3 of World Literature. We are still hanging out in Greece. We're going to be leaving Greece very soon, I promise, but given the direct influence that we can trace for our world to them as one of the earliest literate cultures, then kind of hard to avoid doing a lot of work with them. But this week we are looking at an entirely different form. So last week we were looking at epics, which are in the family of poetry. This week we are looking at drama, very specifically based on the text that we're using. We are looking at tragedy. We're reading Oedipus the King and Medea in their whole complete form. I assume everybody's at least vaguely familiar with the story of Oedipus. He's wormed his way into modern culture. Medea, I'm sure there are still a couple of you who know it, but doesn't tend to be quite as popular. Um, there are a few terms that I feel like are worth getting a handle on if we're going to make sense of this. You don't need to know the terms. I'm not going to quiz you on the, well, that's not entirely true. I'm quizzing you a little bit on the terms, but it's pretty low stakes. Um, but some of the things that we're going to be working with here have to do a lot with the form of a play. Of course, a play is a dialogue-driven piece that is meant to be physically performed. You can do audio performances of plays, but they're really meant to be physically performed on a stage. And these are some of the oldest ones that we have access to in the world. The majority of Greek plays that we still have were related to festivals in some way, whether it was um, a festival of Zeus or a festival of Dionysus, or occasionally a festival of Demeter would get thrown in there, or Pan. He gets lumped in with Dionysus a lot. Um, and especially by the end, then a lot of these would be performed in sets of four. So there would be three tragedies and one comedy. In the classical Greek sense, a tragedy is a play in which a character experiences a downfall or reversal of fortune based on their own fatal flaw or their own hamartia. Um, Very frequently, that fatal flaw would be hubris or overconfidence in the self. Now, the thing is, in order for plays to make sense, we have to understand that the form of plays was actually set down by philosophers. And I don't know if you know this about philosophers. They like categorizing things, they like defining things, they like putting things in boxes. It's sort of their thing. Nothing against philosophers. I'm glad we have people who do that, or else biology wouldn't make a damn bit of sense. But they really liked doing it, and we can see that shining through. So understanding what some of those limitations were might help here. And a lot of the terms that we're going to be going over today will actually relate to that. So those limitations, very particularly here, are related to the unities, U-N-I-T-Y, like the Queen Latifah. Um, and very particularly, there were three primary unities that need to be discussed. There is unity of character, there is unity of time, and there is unity of space. Unity of character is the easiest one. Um, in early Greek dramas, then there would only be two characters interacting on stage at any time, plus possibly the chorus. It later evolved into having three at a time. But there would not be a bunch of extras milling about in the back. There would be two people, and people knew that in the audience knew exactly where they need to focus because those are the two people who are interacting. Any more than that, and it is not a very well unified play according to that definition. Second, unity of space. Everything should take place in a single location or very close to a single location. So a lot of the tragedies that we have um, exist exclusively on like the steps of the palace because that would be a large place in the center of town where it makes sense for a whole lot of people to go. There are also going to be a lot of members of the royal family who are taking part in this because, well, it was for the nobility by the nobility. So, not a whole lot to be done um, about that one. There are exceptions to that, but most of the time the actual setting is going to be there. If anything happens outside of that setting, then it happens off stage and somebody will run in and then tell the people who are there about it. And the third one is the unity of time. So time should pass in the play at the same rate that it passes in the real world. Um, 24, the TV show from like the 2000s, was one of the first ones that I ever experienced that did this outside of ancient Greece. Um, because for every minute that passes in the show, then there's also a minute passing in the real world, and that's a very well unified play. There will occasionally be little time jumps in which like nothing happens, but the perfectly best, most perfectly unified play just takes place in a single hour or two. Um, in order to make that possible, then there are a lot of interesting ways the Greeks found to work around it. One is they like to start stories in the middle. This is something called in medias res. Yes, it's a Latin term for a Greek play. Don't get me started on it. And what that literally means is in the middle of things, or in the midst of the action. So literally the play um, starts just before the end of the play, but then they'll have a flashback sequence in which you get to jump back and find out all the things that are happening. Usually one character will be talking to another one. Both of our plays today start that way. Um, a lot of times then they would find themselves written into a corner, and wouldn't really have a good way to end the play, so literally a god would just come down and say, problem solved. Um, Aeschylus really liked doing that one. Sophocles didn't do it quite as much. Euripides was particularly fond of that particular device as well. And literally, they would have a giant crane that would lower the god character down so that people could see it from behind the scenes. It's called Deus ex machina. It literally means God from the machine. God is coming down from the crane. Um, they didn't like having people get killed directly on the stage either. They would usually take them off stage for that. So there were a bunch of really cool things they would do with the set of the play, which has nothing to do with literature. That's the theater nerd in me. Um, but like they would have little doors or rotating parts of the stage behind them that people could kind of like walk through, and then they would close up behind them. And a lot of times you'll hear somebody like scream off stage, and there'll be a little cart that will come out from the bottom of the stage with their dead body on it. Um, all sorts of fun stuff. But that's going to be kind of our foundation of Greek theater. But again, one of the central things that we're looking at here is the dialogue, because these are very dialogue driven pieces, and they are both tragedies. By the way, the difference between a tragedy and comedy in ancient Greece, again, tragedy has to do with character's downfall based on Hamartia. A comedy is any play that's not a tragedy. It doesn't have to be funny. That's relatively modern, actually. By relatively modern, I mean like Shakespeare. Um, Before that, then just any play that wasn't a tragedy was considered a comedy, although they were often funny and like political satires and things like that. SNL is literally working in the world of Greek theater just so nicely. Um, anyway, so looking at our two tragedies for this week, we've got Oedipus the King and we have Medea that we're going to be working with. Um, Oedipus the King is going to give us the entire backstory. That's literally what they're trying to do, is figure out the mystery. A lot of you know the twist already. Don't spoil it for anybody until they've done the reading. But a lot of you already probably have a pretty good idea of what happens in that one. Medea is a very different animal. It's very much the hell hath no fury, like a woman scorned, personified in this text. And I love Medea because she is a character straight out of Greek mythology. I mean, she's literally hanging out with Jason, as in Jason and the Argonauts. Jason, who was basically like the Captain America of the Greek version of the Avengers, that was the Argonauts. He was Hercules' cousin, like just to give you some context on that one in case you missed that line in the reading. It's bonkers. Um, so this play is literally like, I don't know, the Black Widow movie, I guess, would be the closest analog we have. Anyway, girl power, hoorah. Um, by the way, the girl power part is extremely important here. Greece was a massively patriarchal culture, especially Athenian Greece. A lot of the stories that we have about Amazons being like brutal, violent warrior women and crap like that, that came from Athens. Um, Women did not really get to hold political power. There are a couple of other plays that deal with that one. Lysistrata is one of my favorites. We're not reading it, but it's worth a read for anybody who wants to. Lots of dick jokes. Um, but that's just kind of the stuff that I want you to have in your head as we start moving through this. Um, this is Athenian work, So the other thing that I do want you to be aware of is there are a couple of structures that we're going to be zooming in on, particularly for the journal. I think the journal this week is where I've got this one set up. Um, because this was written by noble philosophers for noble philosophers, um, then they have two major ways of character building and world building within the dialogue of the play, and those are the agon and the sticomythia. You don't have to worry about how to spell them. Agon is a it's a diatribe. It's one character just kind of monologuing about what they're thinking or about what they're feeling or about how they feel about it, and it's a rant. It's a guy wearing a sandwich board saying that the world is ending on the street corner level of rant. Like we will see characters going on for 2 or 3 pages. Medea is great at this one. Oedipus does it a couple times too. Um, the other one, Sticomythia, is actually a little bit more interesting to me because this is based on the idea of Socratic dialogue. Socratic dialogue being where somebody asks a question and then expects the other person to answer it, and then they'll ask another question. And they use this in order to test ideas. Well, this is going to be a back and forth dialogue between two characters where they're trying to come to the truth of something. And the thing with a Sticomythia is not about winning, it's about finding the truth if you're using it correctly in the most contemplative philosophical sense. Our characters are not doing that shit. They're trying to win. Um, because the characters in this piece are not good people. They're not bad people. Well, they're not great people for sure, but they are not meant to be good people. That very frequently happens in tragedy. That's why they have a hamartia, they have a flaw. They're not perfect characters. So we get to see a lot of that play out, but that's very much exemplified by the fact that they want to win rather than just they want to come to the truth. So those are also a couple of other terms you might want to keep in mind. Anyway, happy reading for this week. Hopefully they go relatively quickly. If you're used to reading plays, they go super fast. If you're not used to reading plays, give yourself just a couple of extra hours to work through these. Because it can be a little bit weird just to get used to reading plays if you don't do a whole lot of that. Anyway, have a good week.